This time, we're exploring the art of learning, figuring out why it's so important these days, and, even more importantly, how to get better at it.
Sounds like a plan.
We've got a really cool mix of stuff to dig into, like book excerpts, real stories about people, and even some brain science to help us understand how we learn.
I'm always up for a little brain science.
Me too. It can get pretty mind-blowing, right?
Yeah, especially when you think about how fast knowledge is growing these days. The book we're looking at, it actually predicts that all of human knowledge will be doubling, like every single year by 2030. Crazy.
Wild. It really makes you wonder, like, how can we even keep up with all that? It's definitely not like learn one thing and you're set for life anymore, is it?
No way. And the book actually it uses the author's family as an example of this. Like her dad was a lawyer, right? Same job his whole career.
Yeah, that was pretty typical back then, I guess.
Totally. But then her generation, the baby boomers, they started inventing like whole new types of jobs.
Yeah, and their kids, it's like they're expected to have a bunch of different jobs, different companies, maybe even start their own businesses.
You got it. And it's not just about generations, it's about how fast the world is changing, you know? This knowledge explosion, it's affecting everything like individual careers, whole industries rising and falling.
Yeah, just look at like how Uber and Airbnb changed everything for taxis and hotels,
Mhm.
or how green energy is like shaking up the big oil and gas companies.
Totally. So like being adaptable, always learning, it's not just a nice to have anymore, it's essential.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, the book also says that people like naturally resist truly new ideas.
Huh.
They prefer stuff that fits with what they already know,
Yeah.
you know? So how do we break out of that? How do we get better at like embracing those really out there ideas?
Okay, so despite that resistance, humans are actually wired for learning, you know?
So,
Like our brains are built to keep improving. There's this thing in neuroscience, it's called brain plasticity, which basically means that our brains can make new connections, adapt to new info our whole lives.
so it's not that we can't keep up with all the change. It's more about tapping into how our brains already work.
Exactly. Think about video games, right? People spend hours and hours trying to master games like, oh, I don't know, Angry Birds, going for that perfect score or
Yeah,
whatever.
I've definitely been there.
And it's not because they have to, it's because they're driven by this desire to master it.
It's like built into us or something.
Totally. It's not just about games or when you're young. The book gives this example of a 70-year-old CEO who had to learn all about like modern marketing to hire a new marketing person. He didn't shy away from it, he just dove in.
It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So we've got all this change happening and our brains are ready for it. But how do we actually become better learners? Where do we even start?
Okay, so the book lays out this framework. It's called the ANUW model. It's all about becoming a master learner.
Okay, I like that.
And it's got four main parts: aspiration, neutral self-awareness, endless curiosity, and willingness to be bad first.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
I know, right? But they're like, think of them as mental muscles you can train, you know.
So it's not like you're just born a good learner. It's more about working on these specific skills.
Exactly. And we can dive into each one. So first up is aspiration, which seems pretty straightforward. You got to want to learn it to learn it, rate it. But it's more than just like being interested.
Yeah, there has to be more to it than that.
It's about like really wanting to master something new and being honest with yourself. Like, are you really dedicated to this? Or are you just, telling yourself you are? The book gives this example of a guy named Jim who's always saying he wants to learn piano but never actually does anything about it.
Oh, I know so many gyms.
Right. So aspiration's not just about good intentions. It's got to be backed up by action.
It's like finding what really motivates you and using that to drive your learning.
Exactly. But even if you're motivated, you need to be real about what you're good at and not so good at. That's where neutral self-awareness comes in.
Ooh, that one sounds tricky.
It can be. It's easy to think we're better at something than we actually are, you know?
Oh, yeah. I think we've all been there.
The book actually mentions this psychologist, David Dunning, who studies how people see themselves. He found that people are often totally wrong about their own abilities. Like, his research showed there was basically no connection between what people said they knew and what they actually knew.
So people might think they're experts, but really they have no clue.
Yeah.
That's a little scary.
It is. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it shows why this neutral self-awareness is so important for learning. If you think you already know it all, you're not going to be open to new info or feedback.
So how do you fight that? How do you get better at seeing yourself clearly without, being too hard on yourself.
It's a process, but a good starting point is getting honest feedback from people you trust. The book tells this story about Adam. He's a TV executive, and he knew he could be kind of arrogant, which isn't good for a leader.
Not good at all.
So he worked on being a better listener and being more open to feedback, even if it wasn't, what he wanted to hear.
Did it work?
It actually made him a better leader. His team respected him more because they saw he was willing to learn and listen. So being real about our weaknesses, even if it's uncomfortable, can make us stronger.
That's really interesting. So we've got aspiration and neutral self-awareness. What's next in this ANUW thing?
Okay, next is endless curiosity, which is all about getting back to that, childlike wonder that we often lose as adults, asking why and how about everything and really wanting to find the answers.
I love that. It's like giving yourself permission to be curious again, to look at the world with fresh eyes.
Exactly. And the book uses this great example of a CEO, Deborah, who was brand new to the job, but instead of pretending she knew everything, she was super curious. She was always asking questions, learning from everyone around her.
That's a great approach, especially for a leader, right?
Totally. It shows that curiosity isn't weakness, it's a strength. But what if you're not naturally curious about something? How do you make yourself interested?
Yeah, that's a good question.
The book has this cool technique. It's called curiosity matching. Basically, you think about something you're already super curious about, and you pay attention to how you talk to yourself about it.
Like, what kinds of things do I say when I'm learning about something I love?
Yeah, do you say things like, this is so cool, or I gotta know more? Then you try using that same kind of language for the new topic, even if you're not, initially that into it.
Interesting. It's like tricking your brain into being curious.
Kind of. And the more you do it, the more you might actually start to feel that genuine curiosity.
I like it. So we've got aspiration, neutral self-awareness, and endless curiosity. What's the last piece of this learning puzzle?
Okay, this one might be the toughest. It's willingness to be bad first, which honestly kind of goes against everything we're taught as adults.
Probably. Like we're supposed to be competent, have it all figured out.
Right. But in a world that's changing so fast, clinging to that idea of being good at everything can actually hold us back. We got to get comfortable with being a beginner over and over again.
Yeah, but that's easier said than done. Nobody likes feeling incompetent, especially when we've, spent years building up expertise in other areas.
It's true, but think about how kids learn. They're always trying new things, messing up, falling down, getting back up. They don't have that same fear of being bad that we do.
I guess they haven't learned to be self-conscious about it yet.
Exactly. And that's something we need to rediscover as adults. We got to give ourselves permission to be beginners again, to embrace the messy, imperfect process of learning.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? How do we get over that resistance to feeling like incompetent?
One big thing is managing our self-talk, challenging those negative thoughts that pop up when we feel like we're failing, like I'll never be good at this, or I'm too old to learn this.
Oh yeah, those thoughts can be brutal.
Totally. The book suggests this exercise where you identify a skill you're scared of being bad at and you write down all your negative self-talk about it. Then you rewrite those thoughts to be more positive and encouraging.
So instead of I'm terrible at this, I'll never learn it, it's more like I'm still learning. It's okay to make mistakes. I'll get better with practice.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset.
And the book also mentions something about using skills you already have to help you learn new things.
Oh, yeah. That's about finding those transferable skills. Let's say you're trying to get better at public speaking, but you're already really good at telling stories one-on-one. You can focus on those storytelling skills and use them to make your speeches more engaging.
I see. So instead of starting from scratch, you're building on what you already know.
Right. And that can make the whole process less intimidating and more, approachable.
This A&OB framework is pretty cool. But, what about those times when we have to learn things we're just not that interested in?
Ah, the dreaded fake passion. It happens. Sometimes we gotta learn stuff we're not naturally drawn to, for work, personal goals, or just to broaden our horizons.
Right, but how do you get motivated when the spark just isn't there?
Well, instead of seeing it as a chore, try to find something about it that you can connect with. Maybe it's one specific part of the task that's kind of interesting. Or maybe you focus on the benefits of learning it, even if they're not directly related to your passions.
It's like finding the hidden gem in something that seems boring at first glance.
Exactly. And even if you can't find that genuine passion, you can still make it more engaging. Find a teacher or mentor who's really enthusiastic about it, or connect it to a personal goal that does excite you.
And who knows, maybe what starts as a have-to turns into something you actually love.
That's the beauty of learning. You never know where it might take you.
Okay, but what about those times when it's not about fake passion, it's about, like, those really deep-seated negative thoughts, the ones that feel impossible to shake, even with all the positive self-talk in the world?
Yeah, those can be tough. The book actually talks about this executive. Her self-talk was so negative that it was really hurting her career.
Wow, that's intense. What was causing it? Like a bad experience or something?
It actually went all the way back to her childhood. Her parents were super critical of her, always putting her down, telling her she wasn't smart enough. And even though she was successful, those voices from her past were still there, holding her back.
It's amazing how those early experiences can stick with us.
It's powerful stuff. And for her, it meant she was always second-guessing herself, afraid to take risks, struggling to learn new things.
So how did she break free from those negative thought patterns?
It took a lot of work, for sure, but a big part of it was recognizing that those thoughts weren't actually true. They were just a reflection of those old beliefs she had internalized.
Like those voices from the past were still calling the shots, even though they were totally wrong.
Exactly. And once she could see that, she could start to challenge those thoughts and replace them with more positive and supportive ones.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? Like, it's one thing to know your thoughts are negative, but how do you actually change them?
Well, it takes practice, for one thing. One technique is to, actually talk back to those negative thoughts. So if you think, I'm not good enough, you might say out loud, hold on, that's not true. I've done great things and I can definitely learn this.
It's like having a internal cheerleader to counter those negative voices.
Yeah, you're basically retraining your brain to think differently. And it also helps to surround yourself with positive people who support you and believe in you. Sometimes we need that outside encouragement to shift those internal patterns.
Like having a team of cheerleaders, right?
Right. Exactly. And don't be afraid to get professional help if you need it. A therapist or coach can give you tools to deal with those negative thought patterns.
It's like having a personal trainer for your mind.
I like that. And just like physical fitness, mental fitness takes effort and consistency. The more you work on managing your thoughts, the stronger and more resilient you'll become.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The importance of continuous learning, the ANUW model, even some strategies for dealing with those negative thoughts that can hold us back. What are some main takeaways our listeners can apply to their own lives?
Well, one big one for me is that aspiration piece, cultivating that desire to keep learning, even when it's hard. It's about figuring out what really motivates you and using that to fuel your efforts.
Yeah, like what do you really want to learn, not just what you think you should learn.
Exactly. And once you've got that aspiration, it's about being honest with yourself about what you're good at and not so good at. That neutral self-awareness is key.
And being willing to get feedback, even if it's tough to hear sometimes.
Right. Then, once you've got a handle on that, it's about tapping into your endless curiosity. Getting back to that childlike sense of wonder and asking questions about everything.
And making it fun. Learning shouldn't feel like a chore.
Definitely. And finally, it's about that willingness to be bad first. That's a tough one, but it's so important. Giving yourself permission to be a beginner, to make mistakes, and to learn from them.
It's about embracing the journey, knowing that you don't have to be perfect right away.
Right. Learning is a process, and it's a process that can bring a lot of joy and fulfillment if we approach it with the right mindset.
I love that. So as we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I encourage everyone to embrace the journey of learning, cultivate that aspiration, develop that neutral self-awareness, tap into that endless curiosity, and be willing to be bad first.
Remember, the people who achieve the most are often the ones who are okay with starting as beginners. Embrace continuous learning, and you'll be amazed at what you can accomplish.
So we've talked a lot about the ANW model and all these different mental skills for learning, but it can still feel pretty overwhelming sometimes, right? There's so much to learn and the world's moving so fast.
Oh, yeah, for sure. How do you even create space for learning in the middle of everything else going on?
That's a good question. The book actually talks about being really intentional about your learning environment, like making a space that helps you focus.
Right, making a space that works for you. It's not really about, having a fancy desk or anything, though that might help some people. It's more about cutting out distractions and setting yourself up to actually learn. So that might mean finding a quiet spot, scheduling time for learning, putting your phone on, do not disturb, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I like that, like creating a little mental sanctuary where you can just like dive into the learning.
Exactly. But even with the perfect setup, some stuff is just hard to learn, you know? Like coding, for example, it can seem so complicated and technical.
Oh, totally. Coding seems like a whole other language.
It kind of is, but like with anything else, the trick is to break it down into smaller steps. Don't try to learn everything at once. Just focus on one thing at a time.
Right. It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Huh. Exactly. And don't be afraid to try different ways of learning until you find what clicks for you. Some people like classes, some people prefer, online tutorials, whatever works.
And the book also talked about like finding the joy in learning, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't feel like a chore.
Totally. Learning should be fun, One way to make it more fun is to connect with other people who are learning the same thing. Join some online groups, go to meetups, find a mentor, that kind of thing.
It's like having a support system to celebrate the wins and, help you through the tough parts.
Yeah, exactly. And don't be shy about asking for help when you need it. Most people are happy to share what they know, especially if they're passionate about it.
So we've talked about the environment, breaking things down, finding the joy. What else can we do to be better learners?
Okay, one thing the book emphasizes is this idea of active recall. Basically, it's not enough to just read or listen to something. You got to actively engage with it and try to remember it later.
So instead of just highlighting everything in a book or rereading my notes a million times, I should like quiz myself or try to explain it to someone else.
Exactly. It forces your brain to work harder, which helps you actually remember the information.
It's like a workout for your brain. Are there other mental workouts we can do?
Totally. Another powerful one is spaced repetition. It's basically revisiting the material at different intervals. So you review something today, then again tomorrow, then a few days later, then a week later, and so on.
So it's like reminding your brain about the info right before it forgets it.
You got it. And that helps move the info from short-term memory to long-term memory.
So it's like making sure the info actually sticks.
Exactly. But even with all the best techniques, it's easy to fall back into those old ways of thinking, especially if they're rooted in fear or self-doubt.
Oh, for sure. I think everyone struggles with that to some degree.
Right. Nobody likes to feel like they're failing. And honestly, our culture kind of equates failure with weakness.
Yeah, it's like we're taught to avoid failure at all costs.
But the book has this really cool perspective on failure. It says failure isn't the opposite of success. It's actually a stepping stone to success.
I like that. Like every time you fail, you learn something that gets you closer to succeeding.
Exactly. Think about Thomas Edison, right? He didn't see all those, quote, failed attempts to make a light bulb as failures. He saw them as experiments, as learning experiences that ultimately led to his big breakthrough.
It's like that saying, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work.
Uh-huh, exactly.
Yeah.
And the book points out that a lot of the most successful people are the ones who are willing to take risks and learn from their mistakes. They don't see failure as a reflection of their worth. They see it as a necessary part of growth.
So how do we go from fearing failure to seeing it as a learning opportunity?
Well, one thing that can help is to break down your goals into smaller steps. That way it feels less scary and there's less pressure to, not mess up. Remember, it's okay to stumble as long as you keep getting back up.
It's like that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Right. And another helpful tip is to focus on the process, not just the outcome. Like instead of stressing about what might happen if you fail, just enjoy the learning itself. Find the fun in trying new things and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone.
It's like that other saying, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
Exactly. And if you do hit a roadblock, try to approach it with curiosity instead of judgment. Ask yourself, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I do differently next time?
So it's like turning that failure into data that you can use to improve.
Exactly. And remember, everyone experiences setbacks. It's part of being human. The key is to not let those setbacks define you or stop you from going after your goals.
It's like that Japanese proverb, fall 7 times, stand up 8.
Love that. Resilience is so important for learning. But sometimes, even when we're feeling resilient, we can get in our own way. The book talks about this tendency to overbridge when we're learning something new. Have you ever heard of that?
Overbridge. Not really. What's that all about?
It's basically when we rely too much on what we already know when we're trying to learn something new. Like we try to force the new info to fit into our existing mental models, even if it doesn't really belong there.
So instead of being open to a new way of doing things, we're trying to make it fit with our old way of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. It's natural to draw on our past experiences, but this overbridging thing can actually slow us down. It's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. You might be able to jam it in there, but it's not going to be pretty, and you might break something in the process.
That's a great analogy. So how do we avoid that trap? How do we become more open to new ways of thinking?
Awareness is key. Just notice when you're trying to force a new concept or skill into an old framework that doesn't really work. And then be willing to let go of that old framework and try a new approach. It might feel weird at first, but it's necessary for real growth.
It's like updating your mental map to include new territory. Can't keep using the same old map if you're exploring somewhere new.
Exactly. And sometimes learning is as much about unlearning old habits as it is about learning new things. It's about that beginner's mind, being open to possibilities and approaching each new thing with a sense of curiosity and wonder.
Speaking of wonder, there's one thing I find really cool about learning, and it's the idea that there's always more to learn, even when you're already really good at something. Like mastery is not a finish line, it's a journey.
You got it. The book tells this story about Pablo Casals. He was this world-famous cellist, and when he was 93 years old, someone asked him why he still practiced for 3 hours every day, and his answer was, "I'm beginning to notice some improvement."
Wow, that's incredible. Even at 93, he was still learning and growing.
Right. It shows that learning isn't just about reaching a certain level, it's a lifelong thing. It's about always striving to be better no matter where you are in the journey.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The importance of continuous learning, the ANDW model, some practical strategies, and even some inspiring stories.
Wow.
But before we move on, I'm curious, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges people face when they try to actually put this ANDW framework into practice? What are some of the things that trip people up?
That's a great question. And actually, the book talks about this directly. It calls them dragons, these obstacles that can pop up and get in the way of our learning.
Dragons. Okay, I like that. So let's slay some dragons. One that we've already talked about is that fake passion thing. Like,
Yeah.
what happens when you have to learn something you're just not interested in? How do you find the motivation when the spark's not there?
It's a real struggle for sure, especially at work, right? You might get assigned a project that requires you to learn some new skill that you're just like not into.
Yeah, and it's easy to just be like, why bother? I don't even care about this.
Totally. But that's where it helps to like shift your perspective. Instead of seeing it as this awful chore, try to find something about it you can connect with, even if it's just a small thing. Maybe there's one specific part of the project that's kind of interesting, or maybe you focus on how learning this skill could benefit you in the long run, even if those benefits aren't immediately obvious.
It's like finding that little silver lining, right?
Exactly. Just changing how you think about it can make a big difference in how you approach it.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those times when it's not even about fake passion, it's about those really deep-seated negative thoughts? The ones that just seem impossible to shake, even if you try all the positive self-talk in the world.
Those can be really tough. The book gives this example of an executive who had such negative self-talk that it was really hurting her career.
Wow, that's intense. What was at the root of that? Like, was it a specific experience or just something that had built up over time?
It actually stemmed from her childhood. Her parents were super critical, always putting her down, telling her she wasn't smart enough. And even though she was a successful adult, those voices from her past were still there, like an inner critic that just wouldn't shut up.
It's amazing how those early experiences can shape us so much, even years later.
It's crazy, right? And for her, it meant she was constantly second guessing herself, afraid to take risks, and really struggling to learn new things.
So how did she overcome those negative thought patterns? Was it just willpower, or did she need to, like, develop specific strategies?
It definitely wasn't just willpower. It took a lot of work and self-awareness. One of the most important things was realizing that those negative thoughts weren't actually true. They were just a reflection of those old limiting beliefs that she had internalized.
It's like those voices from the past were still in control, even though they didn't reflect who she was anymore.
Exactly. And once she could see that, she could start to challenge those thoughts and replace them with more positive and supported ones.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually do that? Like, it's one thing to recognize that your self-talk is negative, but it's another thing to actually change it. What are some practical strategies for dealing with those deeply ingrained patterns?
It takes practice and consistency for sure. One technique is to actually talk back to those negative thoughts. So let's say you catch yourself thinking, I'm not good enough. You can respond with something like, Wait a minute, that's not true. I've accomplished a lot and I'm capable of learning and growing. It's like having a compassionate friend in your corner, reminding you of your strengths and potential.
I like that. It's like you're retraining your brain to think differently, creating new neural pathways that support a more positive self-image.
Exactly. And it also helps to surround yourself with positive, supportive people who believe in you and encourage your growth. Sometimes we need that external validation to help shift those internal patterns.
It's like having a cheerleading squad in your corner, reminding you of your awesomeness.
Haha, I love that. And don't underestimate the power of professional help if you're struggling. A therapist or coach can give you tools and strategies for managing those negative thought patterns.
It's like having a personal trainer for your mind, someone to help you build those mental muscles and develop those positive thinking habits.
Exactly. And just like physical fitness, mental fitness takes effort and consistency. The more you practice managing your self-talk and challenging those negative thoughts, the stronger and more resilient you'll become.
Okay, so we've talked about fake passion and managing self-talk. What other dragons might we encounter on our journey to becoming master learners?
One that comes up a lot is the fear of failure. It's something that holds so many people back from going after their goals and trying new things.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Nobody likes to fail. And like we were saying earlier, our society often sees failure as a sign of weakness or incompetence.
Right. But the book encourages us to see failure differently. It reminds us that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's actually a stepping stone to success. Remember that Thomas Edison quote, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work."
It's like failure is just part of the process, right? Every time you fail, you learn something that can help you get closer to your goal.
Exactly. And the book points out that a lot of the most successful people are the ones who are most willing to embrace risk and learn from their mistakes. They don't let failure define them, they see it as an opportunity to grow.
It's like that saying, you learn more from your failures than from your successes.
Totally. And the book gives some helpful tips for dealing with the fear of failure. One is to break down your goals into smaller, more manageable steps. That way, it feels less overwhelming and there's less pressure to not mess up. Remember, it's okay to stumble as long as you get back up and keep going.
It's like that saying, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step.
Right. And another helpful strategy is to focus on the process, not just the outcome. Instead of worrying about what might happen if you fail, try to enjoy the learning process itself. Find the fun in experimenting and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone.
It's like that other saying,
hmm
it's not about the destination, it's about the journey.
I love that. And if you do experience a setback, try to reframe it as a learning opportunity. Ask yourself, okay, what can I learn from this? What can I do differently next time?
So it's like turning that failure into valuable information that you can use to get better.
Exactly. And remember, everyone fails sometimes. It's part of being human. The key is to not let those setbacks hold you back from pursuing your goals.
It's like that saying, fall 7 times, stand up 8.
Love that. Resilience is so essential for becoming a master learner.
Okay, so we've talked about fake passion, managing self-talk, and the fear of failure. Are there any other dragons lurking out there?
Oh yeah, there are a few more. One that can be particularly sneaky is the feeling of being overwhelmed. You know, like in today's world, we're constantly bombarded with information and stimulation, and it can be really hard to focus on learning something new when there's so much vying for our attention.
It's like we're living in this constant state of information overload.
Yeah.
No wonder it's hard to focus sometimes.
Exactly. So it's important to be proactive about creating a learning environment that supports focus and concentration. This might mean designating specific times for learning, finding a quiet space where you won't be interrupted, or silencing your phone and email notifications.
Yeah, it's like creating that mental sanctuary we were talking about earlier, a space where you can really immerse yourself in the learning process without distractions.
Right. And it can also be helpful to break down your learning goals into smaller, more manageable chunks. Instead of trying to learn everything at once, focus on mastering one concept or skill at a time.
It's like eating an elephant one bite at a time. We keep coming back to that analogy, but it's so true.
It is. And don't be afraid to take breaks when you need them. Learning should be enjoyable, not a source of stress. If you're feeling overwhelmed, step away from the material for a bit and come back to it when you're feeling more refreshed.
Yeah, it's like giving your brain a chance to rest and digest all that new information.
Exactly. And finally, don't hesitate to ask for help when you need it. If you're struggling with a particular concept or skill, reach out to a teacher, a mentor, or a fellow learner for support.
It's like having a guide on your learning journey, someone to help you navigate those challenging parts.
Right. And remember that everyone learns at their own pace. What might seem easy for one person might be more challenging for another. The key is to be patient with yourself and focus on your own progress.
It's like that saying, comparison is the thief of joy. Instead of comparing yourself to others, just focus on your own unique journey.
Exactly. And celebrate those small wins along the way. Every step forward, no matter how small, is worth acknowledging.
Okay, so we've talked about fake passion, managing self-talk, the fear of failure, and feeling overwhelmed. Are there any other dragons we need to be aware of?
You know, there's one more that can be pretty sneaky. It's called overbridging.
Overbridging. What in the world is that?
It's this tendency to rely too much on our existing skills and knowledge when we're trying to learn something new. Like, instead of being open to learning a new way of doing something, we try to force fit it into our existing framework.
So it's like we're trying to make the new information fit into our old way of thinking, even if it doesn't really belong there.
Exactly. And while it's great to draw on your past experience and look for connections between what you already know and what you're trying to learn, overbridging can actually hold you back.
How so?
Well, it can prevent you from really absorbing the new skill or knowledge you're trying to acquire. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You might be able to jam it in there, but it's not going to be a good fit, and you might even cause some damage in the process.
That's a great analogy. So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do we become more open to new ways of thinking?
The first step is just being aware of it. Pay attention to those moments when you find yourself trying to force a new concept or skill into an existing framework that doesn't quite work.
Okay, and then what?
Then be willing to let go of that old framework and embrace a new way of thinking or doing. It might feel a little uncomfortable at first, but it's essential for real learning and growth.
It's like updating your mental map to include new territory. You can't keep using the same old map when you're exploring somewhere new.
Exactly. And learning is often as much about unlearning old habits as it is about learning new things. It's about having that beginner's mind, being open to new possibilities, and approaching new things with a sense of curiosity and wonder.
Okay, so we've slain a whole bunch of learning dragons today.
Hmm.
Fake passion, negative self-talk, fear of failure, feeling overwhelmed, and even this overbridging thing. I feel like I'm ready to take on the world.
That's the spirit. But remember, those dragons might pop up again. It's like a video game where you have to keep defeating the same bosses at higher and higher levels.
True. But each time we defeat them, we level up our learning skills.
You got it. Speaking of leveling up, the book makes this really interesting point about mastery. It's not about reaching a certain level of skill and then stopping. True mastery is about always pushing yourself to learn and grow, even when you're already really good at something.
It's like you're never really done learning. There's always another challenge to tackle, another skill to refine.
Exactly. Remember that story about Pablo Casals, the world-famous cellist? When he was 93 years old, someone asked him why he still practiced for 3 hours every day. And his answer was, "I'm beginning to notice some improvement."
That's such a great story. It really shows that learning is a lifelong pursuit, not a one-time achievement.
And it highlights that growth mindset we were talking about earlier. The belief that you can always get better no matter how skilled or experienced you are. That's what keeps us engaged and excited about learning throughout our lives.
Okay, so let's bring it all together. We've explored the importance of continuous learning in today's world. We've unpacked this ANU remodel, and we've even slain a few dragons along the way. What are some key takeaways that our listeners can apply to their own lives?
One of the biggest ones for me is that aspiration piece, cultivating that desire to learn and grow even when it's tough or uncomfortable. It's about figuring out what truly motivates you and using that to fuel your learning.
And being honest with yourself about what you really want to learn, not just what you think you should learn.
Absolutely. And then once you've figured that out, it's crucial to develop that neutral self-awareness, to see your strengths and weaknesses clearly without judgment. This allows you to build on what you're already good at while also recognizing those areas where you want to improve.
And it's about being open to feedback, even if it's hard to hear sometimes.
Right. Then once you have a clear sense of where you stand, you can tap into that endless curiosity. It's about rediscovering that childlike sense of wonder and asking questions about the world around you. It's about actively seeking out information and experiences that will broaden your knowledge and understanding.
And finding ways to make learning fun and engaging. Because, let's face it, nobody wants to do something that feels like a chore.
Totally. And finally, it's about embracing that willingness to be bad first. This is often the toughest part, but it's absolutely essential for mastering anything new. It's about giving yourself permission to be a beginner, to make mistakes, to learn from those mistakes, and to keep getting better over time.
It's about trusting the process and believing that you can improve with effort and practice.
Exactly. And remember, learning is a journey, not a destination. It's a lifelong pursuit that can bring incredible joy, fulfillment, and success.
So to wrap up this part of our deep dive, I encourage everyone listening to embrace the journey of learning, cultivate your aspiration, develop that neutral self-awareness, tap into your endless curiosity, and most importantly, be willing to be bad first.
Remember, the people who accomplish the most are often the ones who are okay with starting as beginners. Embrace continuous learning, and you'll be amazed by what you can achieve.
That's such a great reminder. Thanks for sharing all of this wisdom with us today.
Mhm.
I feel so energized and inspired to keep learning and growing.
That's fantastic. I'm so glad you're feeling inspired.
And I'm sure our listeners are feeling inspired too. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to revisit something we talked about in the first part. You asked me to think about two learning opportunities I'm facing right now, one personal and one professional. Do you remember what those were?
I do. You mentioned wanting to learn more about data visualization for your work, and you also said you've always wanted to learn to play the guitar.
That's right. So I've been giving those some thought, and I think I'm ready to take the plunge.
Awesome. Which one are you feeling most drawn to right now?
I think I'm going to start with data visualization. It feels more immediately relevant to my work, and I'm really eager to start applying those skills. Plus, who knows, maybe once I've mastered data visualization, I can create some cool graphs and charts to track my progress learning the guitar.
That's a fantastic idea. It would be a fun way to combine your two learning goals. So let's walk through how you can apply this A&W model to your data visualization challenge.
Okay, I'm game. Where do we start?
First, let's tap into that aspiration piece. What are the potential benefits of mastering data visualization? How would it enhance your work? How would it make you feel?
Well, like I mentioned before, being able to visualize data would help me communicate insights more effectively. Instead of just presenting boring numbers and tables, I could create visually engaging charts and graphs that tell a story and really make the data come to life.
I love that. How would that specifically impact your work, though? Would it help you give more persuasive presentations? Would it lead to new opportunities or collaborations?
I think it would definitely make my presentations more engaging and impactful. And who knows, maybe it would open doors to new projects or roles that require those data visualization skills. Plus, I think it would just make me feel more confident and competent in my work overall.
Those are all fantastic benefits. It sounds like you have a strong aspiration to learn this skill. Now let's move on to neutral self-awareness. Where do you think you stand right now in terms of your data visualization skills? Are you a complete beginner, or do you have some basic knowledge already?
Honestly, I'm pretty much a beginner. I know how to create some basic charts and graphs in Excel, but I'm definitely not familiar with the more advanced tools and techniques.
That's a great place to start, and it's great that you're being honest with yourself about where you're at. Now, this is where it might be helpful to reach out to some trusted colleagues or mentors who are skilled in data visualization and ask for some honest feedback on your work. Don't be afraid to ask about specific areas where you could improve. Remember, feedback is a gift, even when it's not always what we want to hear.
That's a good point. I've definitely been guilty of shying away from feedback in the past, but I know it's essential for growth.
It is. And remember, you're seeking feedback from a place of neutral self-awareness, not self-judgment. It's about getting a clear and objective assessment of your current skills so you can create a plan for getting better.
Okay, I'm feeling ready to embrace that feedback. What's next?
Now it's time to tap into that endless curiosity. What are you most curious about when it comes to data visualization? What questions do you have? What types of charts and graphs are you most drawn to?
I'm really fascinated by those interactive data visualizations you see online, the ones where you can hover over different data points and really dig into the information. And I also love those infographic style visualizations that tell a story through visuals and text. They're so engaging.
Those are great examples. And those questions you just asked, those are the sparks of curiosity that will fuel your learning journey. Now it's about actively searching for answers to those questions. You can explore online tutorials, check out books and courses, and maybe even see if there are any workshops or meetups in your area focused on data visualization.
That's a good point. I often wait for learning opportunities to come to me, but I need to be more proactive about seeking them out.
Exactly. And finally, let's talk about that willingness to be bad first. As you start exploring data visualization, Remember that it's okay to start small, to experiment, to make mistakes. You're not going to become an expert overnight, and that's okay.
I know, but I'm definitely guilty of getting impatient with myself when I'm not progressing as quickly as I'd like.
I think we all struggle with that from time to time. But remember, learning is a process, not a destination. And the more you can embrace that beginner's mindset, the more you'll enjoy the journey.
It's like giving myself permission to play and experiment and explore without feeling pressured to be perfect.
Exactly. And as you practice those data visualization skills, pay attention to that self-talk. Notice any negative thoughts that pop up, like, I'm terrible at this, or I'll never get this. And when you hear those thoughts, gently challenge them and replace them with more encouraging statements.
Like, I'm learning something new, and it's okay to make mistakes. With practice, I'll get better over time.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate those little victories along the way. Maybe you figured out how to create a new type of chart, or maybe you received some positive feedback from a colleague on a visualization you put together. Those are all signs that you're moving in the right direction.
I'm really glad we went through this exercise. It's so helpful to have a framework and some specific strategies for approaching a new learning challenge. I feel way more confident and excited about tackling data visualization now. Who knows, maybe it'll even spark a new passion I didn't know I had.
That's the amazing thing about learning. It has the power to surprise us and lead us in unexpected directions. And remember, this ANUW model is something you can apply to any learning goal you have, whether it's for work, personal growth, or just for the pure joy of learning.
This has been such an insightful and inspiring deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools for approaching learning, and I'm excited to start using them.
That's awesome. And remember, the most important thing is to just start. Take that first step, embrace the journey, and see what amazing things you can achieve.
Those are some wise words. Thanks so much for being here today and sharing your expertise with us. It's been a pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring all that this wonderful world has to offer. That's a great reminder that learning is a journey. It's not about like reaching a certain level and then stopping. It's about constantly pushing yourself, right?
Exactly. You know, even when you're already good at something, there's always more to learn, more to explore. It's like that growth mindset we keep talking about, the belief that we can always improve.
It's what keeps things interesting. Yeah. Always having something new to discover. Okay, so before we wrap up this whole deep dive, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. You had me think about two learning opportunities, one personal and one professional.
Oh, yeah. I'm curious to hear what you came up with. What are those skills or knowledge areas you're looking to develop?
Well, on the professional side, I've been thinking about data visualization for a while now. It seems like it's becoming like essential for anyone who works with data. I want to be able to tell stories with data, make it more impactful.
Data visualization is definitely a powerful tool. Being able to present data in a way that's clear and engaging can make a huge difference in how people understand and connect with the information.
Yeah, exactly. And then the personal one is, well, it's a bit more fun, maybe. I've always wanted to learn to play the guitar.
That's awesome. Music is such a great way to express yourself, and learning an instrument can be so rewarding. So, which one are you feeling more drawn to right now? Which one are you ready to tackle first?
I think I'm going to go with the data visualization.
Hmm.
Feels more relevant to my work right now, and I'm kind of itching to start putting those skills into practice. And hey, maybe once I've got data visualization down, I can use it to like track my progress on the guitar, create some cool charts and graphs to show how I'm improving.
I love that idea. It's a great way to connect your two goals. So let's walk through how you can actually use the ANUW model to tackle this data visualization challenge.
Okay, I'm ready. Where do we start?
Let's begin with aspiration. What are the benefits you see in mastering data visualization? How would it improve your work? How would it make you feel?
Well, as I mentioned, it would definitely help me communicate insights from data more effectively. Instead of just like showing people a bunch of numbers or tables,
Hmm.
I could create visuals that tell a story, make the data more engaging and memorable.
Okay, good start. But how would that impact your work specifically? Would it help you be more persuasive in presentations? Could it lead to new opportunities or collaborations?
I think it would definitely make my presentations more impactful, for sure. And, maybe it would open doors to new projects or even new roles that require data visualization skills. Plus, I think it would just make me feel more confident and capable in my work overall.
Those are all great benefits. It sounds like you have a strong aspiration to learn this skill. Now let's move on to that neutral self-awareness piece. How would you assess your current data visualization skills? Would you say you're a complete beginner, or do you have some foundation to build on?
Honestly, I'd say I'm pretty much a beginner. Like, I know the basics of creating charts and graphs in Excel, but that's about it. I don't have much experience with more advanced tools or techniques.
That's a great starting point, and it's good that you're being honest with yourself about where you're at. This is where it might be helpful to get some feedback from people you trust, maybe some colleagues or mentors who are skilled in data visualization. Ask for their honest opinions on your work, and don't be afraid to ask for specific areas where you could improve.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know feedback is valuable, but I've definitely been guilty of avoiding it in the past.
It's natural to shy away from feedback sometimes, but it's essential for growth. And remember, you're approaching this from a place of neutral self-awareness, not self-judgment. It's not about beating yourself up. It's about getting a clear and objective assessment of where you are so you can figure out how to get where you want to be.
Okay, I'm ready to embrace the feedback. What's the next step?
Now it's time to tap into that endless curiosity. What are you most curious about when it comes to data visualization? What questions do you have? What kinds of charts and graphs really catch your eye?
Well, I've always been fascinated by those interactive data visualizations you see online. The ones where you can hover over different data points and explore the information in more detail. And I also really love those infographic style visualizations that combine visuals and text to tell a compelling story.
Those are great examples. And those questions you're asking, those are the sparks that will ignite your learning journey. Now it's time to actively seek out the answers. Explore online tutorials, check out books and courses, maybe even see if there are any data visualization workshops or meetups in your area.
It's a good reminder that I need to be more proactive about finding those learning opportunities.
Exactly. And finally, let's talk about that willingness to be bad first. As you dive into data visualization, remember that it's okay to start small, to experiment, to make mistakes. You're not going to become a master overnight.
Yeah, I know, but I have to admit, I do get impatient with myself when I'm not progressing as quickly as I'd like.
We all do. It's so easy to fall into that trap of wanting to be good at something right away. But the more you can embrace that beginner's mindset, the more fun you'll have along the way.
It's like giving myself permission to just play and experiment and explore without feeling pressured to be perfect.
Exactly. And as you're practicing your data visualization skills, pay attention to your self-talk. Notice any negative thoughts that might creep in, those, I'm terrible at this, or I'll never get this thoughts. And when you hear those thoughts, gently challenge them and replace them with more positive and supportive statements.
Like, I'm learning something new, and it's okay to make mistakes. I'll get better with practice.
Exactly. And don't forget to celebrate those small wins. Maybe you figured out how to create a new kind of chart, or maybe you got some positive feedback on a visualization you created. Those are all wins worth celebrating.
I'm really glad we went through this exercise. I feel a lot more confident and excited about learning data visualization now. Who knows, maybe it will even spark a passion I never knew I had.
That's what's so cool about learning. You never know what you might discover about yourself along the way. And remember, this ANUW model is a tool you can use for any learning goal, whether it's professional, personal, or just for the pure fun of it.
Well, this has been such an amazing deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools and strategies for approaching learning, and I'm really excited to put them into practice. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure.
And to all our listeners out there, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring all the amazing things this world has to offer.